The Secret Life of Dad.
Daddy made a podcast.
David Chambers, welcome to The Secret Life of Dads. Tell us a secret about you that not many people know.
Oh, secret about me. I think there's two things I'm going to say. First one is somewhat comical. Is I love manicures and pedicures. I regularly go for a manicure and pedicure. Love it.
Do you?
Yeah. I love going to like a little Vietnamese joint and having a manicure pedicure. It's great. I don't have to talk to anybody. I get pampered. I get to go home.
Have you ever been for pedicure?
No,
manicure?
I'm pedicure curious. And, and are you,
Pedicurious.
I mean, pedicurious. Are you normally the only bloke in there? What is
Yes,
it? Yeah.
almost always. Unless there's like some husband, partner, son that's like hanging around on there.
Do you ever get any raised eyebrows when you go in?
Yes, I once went in Australia many years ago, and the women literally giggled for an hour when I was there. The giggles would range from like, your feet are so big, and various things like that. So it was very,
Have you ever been into one of the places where the fish nibble your feet? You put them in the tanks?
Yes, I have. I can tell you exactly. I was in Cambodia.
Oh, wow.
Actually. Yeah, that's a very strange experience.
Yeah. Apparently it's not that hygienic.
Really?
What I've heard. Yeah. Apparently it's not that good.
Yeah, because I guess they must draw blood from time to time.
Yeah. I think if somebody said to me, put your feet in a bowl of dead skin, I'd be like, oh, okay.
Well,
The fish eat it, don't they?
But you only put your feet in there. You don't like put your hands or head in there.
That was
I
not,
see your face in
not
there.
part of the deal for me.
I like that. What's number two?
What's number two, actually, this is a bit more serious, I guess, is that most people see me as a very confident, outgoing person, but really underneath, I can often be quite riddled with self-doubt. I say that in quite a nonchalant way, but it's really a kind of constant experience I have. And I think as men, we don't often talk about that part of like feeling self-doubt, worrying about who we are, if we're doing well, because we kind of have the assumption that we should be doing well.
How have you noticed those feelings of self-doubt since you've become a father?
Oh man, that was, the first few days, you're like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? I think I'm doing this wrong. I'm not doing a very good job. He looks like he's doing a much better job than me over there. Or you're walking through, we had a emergency cesarean. So we were in hospital for 3 days. So you would see other fathers around and you'd be like, oh, he looks quite fresh. Doesn't look so tired. Maybe they're doing something better than we're doing. Oh God, did I do this wrong? I'm feeding him wrong. I overfed him again. It's all this kind of thing that kind of is constantly whirling around the mind, taking up so much mental space.
Yeah. How was your partner's experience of your first child?
Yeah, I think for her it was a lot, very intense. We did sit down and talk about it after after about a week or two, maybe 3. It was very whirlwind because she was late, she was overdue. So by the time we got into hospital there was one induction, a couple of different induction techniques versus the sweep with basically to pull apart the membrane from the cervix, if I remember rightly. That didn't work. Then she had some sort of rods inserted, which apparently soak up lots of moisture and open up the cervix. That didn't work either. And then we went on to this third, which is a hormone tablet, which she was taking every 2 hours for the best part of, we did that all afternoon on Saturday. And then the second to last tablet, the deal was if you get to the last tablet, which I think is the 8th one, if nothing starts by that point, then you get a rest for like 12 hours. And we'd already been at hospital. We hadn't slept for kind of a whole 2 nights before that. So we were thinking, great, we can have a nice little sleep now, we'll be okay. And then she had that 7th tablet, and then the contractions kicked in.
Wow.
And they're very irregular. And then by Sunday afternoon, it went from a lot of pain after an epidural that didn't really work, and then we were in theatre. So I think for her it was, not the birth we wanted. I think that's probably the phrase we use a lot. That's not the birth we wanted, but we're happy that we got it.
We all have this idea of kind of the birth we want, don't we? I think it's kind of ingrained, especially from Western culture. This is how it's going to be. Yeah. It's going to be really easy. You're going to come out of the hospital holding hands. Your baby will sleep all night. That's why we started a podcast. It's the complete antithesis to that.
That's it. The emergency C-section really resonates. Our first was an emergency C-section. And then against the medical advice, my wife
Turn up for the books.
I was thinking, because my daughter's my oldest and she was an emergency C-section. I'm thinking about her arrival into this world as being quite a full-on, in many ways, traumatic experience, you know. And so the medical advice for my second to my wife and my son, bit of a tongue twister, was to have another planned C-section, but there was this innate desire within my wife to want to try to have a natural birth, and so our son ended up being a natural birth, and thank goodness it went well the second time as well. So I've had the two different experiences. The second one, my son, was very quick. My wife was literally on all fours in the parking lot of the hospital saying, "It's coming, he's coming, I'm pushing." And this is following like a half an hour, like the movies, like you think, honestly, labor never really happens like that. You know, I'm driving down these country lanes at, 90 miles an hour, and she's screaming through the dark, and she's unclipped herself from the car seatbelt, and she's turned around and she's hugging the backrest to the...
Yeah, put your seatbelt back on, please.
Yeah, but she's screaming, and it's like just like this hectic movie scene. We pull up to the hospital, and it's gone midnight at this point, coming up close to midnight at least, and she just opens the door and just bails, like before I even get a chance to get up to the hospital doors, and she's on all fours pushing, and no one else is around. It's pitch black. I got to the hospital to open up the door, and I'm banging on the buzzer. It's locked. No one's answering.
Wow.
So eventually, after like 5-10 minutes of this, I actually break the door open to the hospital. It sets off the alarm to the hospital because the maternity ward is upstairs.
I didn't know this.
And then we had all these nurses and midwives rush down, and then it was like boom, straight into the birthing room, and it all just happened so fast. So that was the second one.
The door's locked.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was a massive technical error, and because it was the maternity building, there's no one on the ground floor. Everyone's on the first or second floor.
Wow.
So it was late at night.
And fucking banging at the
yeah,
door downstairs.
I literally broke the door and set the alarm off to get in because my wife was on all fours
and that's
pushing.
how my godson came into
and
the
that's
world.
and that's how. Yeah.
Thank
Anyway,
God,
sorry,
didn't
that
know
just set me off on that story.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask you, David. You said that you sat down and had a chat. 2 or 3 weeks maybe afterwards. Is that to process what you've been through and to discuss it? So I'd love to hear about how that conversation went.
Yeah, God. Yeah, it was, because we realised that when you have your first, it's like you go into hospital, you don't have a baby. And then you leave, you have one. And then suddenly this thing is crying every, 45 minutes pretty much, and wanting feeding or sleeping. So for the first couple of weeks, it was just like a daze. A couple of moments where we just like looked at each other and broke down in tears. I think in the first couple of weeks, and then we kind of sat down and talked about it, like what happened and like how do we feel about what happened? What would we have changed? Would we gone along with some of the advice? Like what really upset us about certain things? Who were we really grateful to for? And just kind of unpacking some of it, because we had obviously two very, very different two perspectives. And I think what's really, beautiful about my partner is that she was very interested in my perspective. It wasn't all about her perspective. Because one of the things that I noticed, and I'm sure both of you have experienced, as you go through the NHS journey of having a baby, no one really asks you how you are. No one turns to you and says, "Excuse me, sir, how are you feeling? How's your mental health doing? How are you feeling about your whole life being changed? Like, do you want to talk? Would you like to see a therapist? Would you like to talk to a counsellor?" At no point did anyone ask me how I was feeling. And obviously I understand why, but considering that, I'm one half of a parental unit looking after a very small, vulnerable child, I think it would be very wise to start checking in, saying, "How are you, mister?" Because your life is also changing. You're also going through a lot emotionally. So yeah, we sat down and talked about it between the two of us. And yeah, I think it was a lot of, sadness. There was a lot of sadness around like how some things panned out. A lot of wishing that we maybe had taken more agency and maybe said no at certain times, especially some of the asked for more information at periods, because our plan was to have a water birth in the hospital, because there's a little unit for that. And we were given those hormone tablets, but no one mentioned that once you take these hormone tablets, you can't go have a water birth anymore. Because if someone had said that to us, then we might have said, actually, let's hold on. A lot for there when she had the rods taken out, it was about midnight. We'd been called into the hospital at 9 p.m. And at that point, we were in the hospital in triage because there was no beds in the antenatal unit for her to go to. And this is a crazy part of being in triage. Someone gave birth in triage. She came in and she was screaming and said that she needed the midwife to help her. And the midwife came and was like, no, you're not ready. You need to do some work. You need to move around. You need to walk around. Your baby's not coming. Within this 10-minute period, she's screaming louder and louder and more pain, saying the baby's coming, the baby's coming. And then you could kind of hear the midwife muttering to herself in annoyance on the other side. Imagine we're all just in cubicles, right? You know, just like a little thin sheet between you all. And then the midwife went in. The woman's like, my baby's coming. And she was like, no, your baby's not coming. She goes, let me just look between your legs. She looks between your legs. She goes, your baby's coming. Start pushing. Push.
Oh
push.
my
3
goodness.
minutes later, screaming child.
Wow.
And we were sitting there.
Shit just got real.
We were like, my partner's lying in the bed. I'm sitting in this really uncomfortable chair. And we're like, oh my God, that baby was just born.
Wow.
And there's another woman screaming over next to her who has been in labor pains for 10 days. And so we're sitting in hospital and we stayed in that particular, we didn't get a bed until 4 a.m. in the morning. So if we'd done this all again, what we would go back and do is get those rods taken out and go, we're going to go home. You call us when we've got a bed for us. Or we'll come back in the morning. Because at that point, we didn't need to actually be there. We should have just left, gone home, had a good night's sleep. But we didn't know.
Yeah, I think what you said just then about being able to sit down with your partner after a few weeks and to have that discussion is incredible. But I think there'll be so many men, I didn't do that with my partner. I think because, you know, your career, your life is intimacy and understanding these roles. So I'm sure you can understand how she was feeling. There'll be so many men maybe listening to this that are thinking, God, I want to get on that level with my partner. Like if we're lucky enough to have a second child, you just saying that then was like, wow, that's such a great idea. Hey, you're feeling this way, I'm feeling this way. What can we do to come together to better our relationship, to better this child's life? But there'll be so many men who just will feel a bit lost, a little bit stuck, a little bit isolated and won't know where to start with that conversation.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to them?
I would say, I guess, if you're before you're having a baby, you start to just talk more now about how you're feeling. Like ask your partner how she's feeling about being pregnant. What does it feel like? Because, you know, we're just observing really. And create a space where you can be honest without judgment, honest without kind of being attacked or this kind of, because often if we're worried that if I say how I feel, it's going to be used against me in that moment. Like, oh, you shouldn't feel like that. Why? You're just a man just hanging around. Why? But, you know, we've been cultivating our relationship for, 5 years. So starting early, start beforehand. Talking about, like the birth plan is a really useful thing, but also learning about the different ways in which the birth plan doesn't go to plan we knew some things, but we didn't probably know as much as we wanted to. It's really useful. There was a book that my partner was reading called, what was the book called? It's called The Fourth Trimester, actually. I can't remember who it's by. I can't remember. It's called The Fourth Trimester. And what that talked about was obviously the fourth trimester after the baby's born. But it had like all sorts of questions and things you should talk about just before and also afterwards, like even things about sex and intimacy and how you want things to be and so forth. Like we had all these conversations beforehand. So it meant, like after our son's called Bjorn, after he was born, there was a few comments that we made even together. It was like, we're both coaches as well, right? So we said, we should really at some point sit and talk and unpack what happened over those days. And just that little comment saying, we should do that. We're like, yeah, we should do that. And being intentional. So like when there was space, when there was a time that was appropriate and we see it's important and then following through with that. And I think it's cultivating good communication in the relationship, which can always start straight away right now. We can all start right now with that. If the communication isn't where we want it to be, we can enter into and lead in a new level of communication. I'm often saying to the men I work with, they're like, I feel like, we don't really talk. I'm like, what do you want to do about this now? What do you want to start doing about this now? What would you love? How would you love things to be? And start taking action to create that, because one person can have such a powerful influence on relationship to transform the relationship or transform particular aspects of the relationship.
David, I think this is a good time because some of the listeners might be uncertain. Just to run us through and explain exactly what it is you do and how you got into this line of work, because I think it's possibly an emerging form of coaching that perhaps a lot of men, certainly dads, might not be familiar with.
Yeah. So I'd say I'm a men's dating, relationship, and intimacy coach. I actually worked in tech for 16 years, in building software, not too far from here for a lot of my time. And I always had a real interest in dating initially, how humans come together. And then that kind of had a deep interest in sex, even from like a reasonably young age when I was, I grew up in a Christian household, so there was some shame from that, or there was tried to be put on me. But I was very interested, so I would read books and I would learn and understand like how humans kind of come together and how humans talk to each other and how we have these subtle ways of saying things and not saying things, and the kind of unsaid things that we kind of assume once one another. And I would say that there's a point, probably about 10 years ago, I come back from travels and I just saw that a lot of the men I was meeting, my good friends, were like very lonely, very depressed, very unhappy. So I started to really look at the idea of masculinity and the intersection between like relationships and sex and how those things all kind of blend together for us. And then I slowly transitioned. I started a podcast and then I transitioned into my job now. So I work almost solely with men and with some couples, but really diving into these aspects of being a man.
So why do we need to talk more about men's intimacy? And also, how should we frame that conversation?
Yeah, because as men, we don't talk about sex in a way that gives an opportunity for actual depth. We talk about sex, it's in the pub, a couple of lads, and we're talking about what we did. We talk about the doing.
The physical act of it.
The physical act of it, as if it's only a physical act, right? It's like watching football, right? And we talk about the shots and the tackles and the headers and stuff like that. Like those things happen, but there's also a much deeper level of the game that's occurring, right? There's the tactical moves of it.
Analogy.
There's the emotional, there's the emotional energy. There's the stress that came into the game because of the results beforehand. There's the crowd watching who put pressure on you, right? There's the media that and so forth. And it's like we don't talk about sex with the multiple levels there are, because there's the act, then there's all the story we have, right, about sex. There's the emotions we carry, like shame and guilt and lust and what that means about us. And and as men, we don't talk about that stuff. So people don't think we even think about it. We don't feel it. So there's an assumption that we only operate at this level. And I know from my work, there's so much more. So it gives us an opportunity to realize that much of what we're thinking and feeling, we're not alone. That's a big thing I see for men. Is like, if a man is not having much sex in his relationship, he'll think, oh God, it's just me. I'm doing something wrong. There's something wrong with me. He may never talk to his partner about it. So that more and more guilt builds, or he projects the guilt onto her and he's like, it's her fault if it's a heterosexual relationship. And instead of actually having the conversation and realizing that maybe it's the way that he's initiating sex, or, she doesn't feel attractive. That's why she doesn't want to have sex. Or they have different types of sex drives, different, responsive, reactive, or they're both responsive, for instance, or they're not making an effort to initiate in a way that's actually enticing and inviting to the other person. But if we don't talk about these things, we're just stuck in our thoughts about it alone. And, just sitting men down in a circle sometimes in a room talking about sex is transformative, because we realize I'm not alone. I don't have to be ashamed. The shame I carry about the deficiencies I think I have and that only I suffer from, that's not true. And then we can start to look at it and go, well, if that's not true, what else isn't true that I'm thinking or believing?
How do we differentiate sex and intimacy then? I think I'd imagine, right, if you sit down with a group of men and say, let's talk about intimacy, we'd probably all just go sex. But intimacy is completely different to sex, right?
Yeah.
What conversations do you have with men to help them get into it and understand everything about intimacy?
So intimacy, if you look in the dictionary and you look at the word intimacy, it will say it's a euphemism for sex, right? So that's how we use the word. We use it because the word sex is so loaded for us from even a young age that we don't use it. So we start to feel we want a softer word for us, right? It's like the word penis feels too loaded and too straight. So we use willies and cocks and whatever because it feels softer for us.
It's so funny. Even saying willies and cocks there, I just giggled. It's just like, it's ingrained within our culture. Since growing up, anybody says, I can't stop smiling now because you've said that.
Did you used to draw willies on your book at school and show the person next to you?
No,
No, me neither.
that's very immature.
No, I've never done
No,
that.
I did that.
Sorry.
Or do it in bathrooms.
Yeah.
Every single men's toilet you go in anywhere, like there's a pub or a bar, someone has etched a willy onto
Yeah.
the
You've
wall.
got different.
Good cock, that one. Good cock.
You've got the lazy penis drawing, which is just the outline.
Yeah.
Maybe get the head on there if you're in a bit of a rush. But then you've got the ones where they've sat down and drawn the veins on, and particularly given each pube its own different kind of strand and line.
Yeah.
I mean,
you know it's a good cock when you see it.
yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay. Let's unpack this, David. I really want to get into this now.
drawing
Okay.
penises?
Not penises.
Okay.
No. We will
Intimacy
go
and
back
sex.
to that. Intimacy and sex. So before I left today, my wife is really into her love languages.
Beautiful.
And her love language is touch.
Great.
Okay. She loves it. Mine isn't.
How do you feel about touch?
I
Yes, okay, I got it. I can see. It
You've
feels
got
slightly awkward.
it feels I like my own space. I'm not a hugger at bedtime. But I know it's really, really important to her. So I really want to unpack this and understand probably a little bit more like why I'm afraid to be so intimate. When it's sex and, we start to get into it, then it's all guns blazing. But I want to be a better partner and be able to comfortably just sit on the sofa and just put my arm around her and pull her in and just, rather than her orchestrating that or saying,
And she
"Look,
gets,
Matt, let's
and she
do it."
gets annoyed when she's
And she gets
orchestrating.
annoyed when I don't. And my love language is when she does the laundry and picks up socks and does things like that. And I really appreciate that.
Acts of
I'm
service.
not saying acts of service, okay? I'm not saying she just does the laundry. I deeply do that. Sorry, that sounded terrible. But acts of service. But I know it's really, really important for her. So I'd imagine, I don't want to pigeonhole this, but a lot of men might be like me. They might be that only want to get onto an intimacy level when they know they're going to have sex. But it's so, so important to my wife. So what can I do to be a better husband when I get back home?
When you do hug her, how does it feel?
It takes, if she, like this morning, she went to an event yesterday and they tried this. It was like a water hug, I was told, where you wrap your arms around and you hug, and we held each other this morning for like 30 seconds. And my initial reaction is after the 10 to go, okay, cool, thanks. When I sit there and stay with it and get past that initial, it's actually quite lovely.
Yeah.
And I know it's really important to her, and if it's important to her, it's important to me. But I feel like, I don't want to speak on behalf of all men here, but is this something a lot of men struggle with?
Yeah.
That basic level of intimacy, even just being able to, hey, let's just have a cuddle, doesn't have to lead to sex.
Yeah. It's really common. I've got a group, I'm running a group program at the moment for men, and I touch on attachment styles quite a lot. So I've got a group of men who are avoidant, and often avoidant men, they like their space, both personal space, mental space as well. They don't like to feel smothered. They worry, and the deep fear is often that if we get too close to someone, we'll lose ourselves. We'll be smothered. We'll be smothered and enmeshed. And my theory is that it's like we'll become like kids again. Maybe we had mothers who were, my mum was very nosy and wanted to be in my business a lot and stuff like that. So I was like, I need to keep my space and my autonomy. So what you described there with the 30 seconds is a really good example. It's a bit like ice baths, right? You get in the ice bath, the first 10 seconds, you're like, oh my God, why on earth am I doing this? This is the most horrible thing I could do for myself.
You said that's what it's like for hugs. This is the worst thing I can possibly do.
And then after 5-10 seconds, you're like, oh, actually, this is quite nice. This is quite pleasant, right? And I know from my experience of doing ice baths that the more you have the ice bath, the 10 seconds starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller, doesn't it? It starts to get down to 1 second, to the point where you're thinking about getting into the ice bath and you're like, this is going to be great, right?
Yeah.
We adjust, practice, lean in and practice. It's your initial reaction, that isn't truly who you are and what you want. You just know that's an habitual habit that you've had for many years.
I think it's just starting it, right? I know I can change. Neuroplasticity shows that the brain's ability to change, it can happen, but it's taking that first step of, and I know it would make us so happy, like really happy, rather than just, okay, we're cuddling now, it's time for sex. It's just, no, we can just be present with each other. We can discuss things with my arm around her.
Why don't you practice with me?
Yeah. What, the sex?
I mean, we'll start
Very
with the
different
hugging. We'll
podcast.
break down those, barriers. You'll adapt with me, and then I will send you back home to Chessie, complete like a hug monster, and I would just bash those door downs and go hug away.
What are your intimacy levels like, Lawrence?
What does it?
If Miranda
I don't
was
know.
to come to you and she hugged you for 30 seconds, how would you feel?
No, I'm quite a hugger, so I hug everyone, men or women, people I just meet, and I now know that maybe I shouldn't do that, but I can't help myself because humans are so bloody lovely, and I just love, But
what about your wife?
But about my wife, I love hugs. They're great. I love hugs. What I love to do is to kind of get in nice and close, and then just switch off the mind like you're meditating. So release any stories, and try and just begin again, as it were, from that moment. Begin again, and then you settle into your breathing. And I noticed that you tend to find the same breathing patterns. And so it can be like a deregulation. It can be like a parasympathetic trigger where if you were feeling a bit stressed or you're busy or you're running around or just excited or whatever, you just start to feel that nervous system calm. And it's tempting to want to use words sometimes, but I just try to often hold off from doing that. And then maybe after you've, maybe the mind has tried to perk up and it has tried to tell you, okay, stop now. And you've moved past that. Then I love to come out of it and then have a conversation at that point about how was your day or whatever, because you're in a far less reactionary state and you're far more responsive. I find the compassion is all there. But so I've always loved cuddles. I've always loved it. I like with my rugby team back in the day, all of it. I'm all over it. I love all this stuff. So I'm lucky, but I do, I definitely have that again, that the line between intimacy, connection, and then sex as well, because sometimes I feel my sexual energy in my mind, sometimes it's in my body, and sometimes I don't feel it at all. So it's just kind of navigating where I'm with that, because sometimes it can be very ego-led. I find like my mind is, and I have to sort of manage that or experience it and manage it. But sometimes it's very much in my body and it feels natural and and if that's in sync and in tune with my wife, then great.
Yeah. Are we fighting against biology a little bit with it in terms of intimacy? I think that to be intimate is to be vulnerable. To be vulnerable means somebody can have power over you. Is there something in that with men?
It's more to do with an indoctrination that men receive, right? From a young age, we learn that being vulnerable is dangerous, right? Because we go to school, we're 5 years old, you fall over, you scrape your knee, and someone picks you up, and often we experience if someone told us, "Big boys don't cry. What are you crying for? Stop crying," right? Someone told us that, right? Or we were holding and hugging a friend, right? A good friend, and we were told, "Stop being a sissy." Right? These are things that happen. There is something called the man box rules, and there's like a set of rules that we indoctrinate boys into and men into. Things like be strong. A lot of these rules are actually perfectly reasonable things if they're not done to the extreme. Just like be strong. What's some of the other ones? I always forget these. One of them's like be straight, don't be gay. Don't talk about anything deep or serious. Keep it sports, keep it superficial. Some of the harmful ones are like to be dominating women, right? People lesser than you. And then one of the kind of rules is that any man who's not following these rules, you should bully into these rules, right? So you see how this plays out on men and boys as our psyche. Suddenly we're like, well, if I'm hugging a woman and then other people see me hugging my woman, are they going to think I'm a sissy? And I can't be a sissy because if I'm a sissy, I'm not a real man, right? But these have been fed into our minds so much. And then if you add in another layer I talk about quite a bit is kind of attachment style. Sometimes we'd believe that all men are kind of avoidant. That means we move away from love. We're afraid of love, right? And our fear of love means that we move away from it, right? So obviously hugging is a way in which closeness happens. And if we're afraid of the love and closeness and losing ourselves or that we'll get hurt from that, we're going to move away from closeness and we're going to keep our distance and feel safe. So sometimes men have like this double whammy of this kind of what we call kind of conditioning that happens, which means that we are just distant from people often, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, and we see the impact of that on men, especially today.
These two themes that are popping up a lot for me. So number one is conditioning. Yeah. Are we talking kind of social conditioning there, or
Definitely.
Even like from a
young age, like, I think they've seen studies where we start talking to boys and girls differently from the moment we know there's a boy and girl in the room, right? We give them different toys and we speak to them differently. We tell boys that they're smart, and they are clever and they are strong. And we tell girls they're pretty and they're cute. And, you know, I've got a 3-month-old, and even I have noticed myself going to him, you're so clever, you're so smart. And then I'm like, you know, having to then also give him the range that he can also be beautiful and cute and delicate. Because once we start with that, we're telling him, we tell them it's like, well, this is what being a boy is. And if you're not this, then you're being a girl, because the other stuff's a girl and you don't want to be a girl. And that's often the very simple thing we learn is like, be a boy, don't be a girl. Be a girl, don't be a boy. And it happens kind of both directions.
Yeah, we kind of find that normally attention is a precursor to solving a problem. Right? COVID is a problem, put attention to it, we can solve it. Masculinity, it seems stuck. We're talking about it more and more and more, but we're adding more and more, you know, fuel to the flames. What impact is the conversation around masculinity having on the boys that we're raising today?
It's the quality of the conversation. Like, I do some workshops in schools, and I ran a couple last summer, and what I saw really was a lot of the boys are consuming content from social media platforms, TikTok, YouTube mainly, some from Instagram. And obviously the stuff they see is the stuff that's the most sensationalized, because that's the things that get the most likes and comments, because people comment on things that make them angry and make them feel very intense emotions, especially negative emotions, than they do positive emotions. So and you see the news, for instance, there's way more eyes and information about Andrew Tate, for instance, than all the wonderful men, the very great men who are doing really great work around masculinity, right? Because our newspapers want to sell. So those boys see that content and they start to think, well, that's how I should be a man, because the men they're looking at on these, you know, Andrew Tate and some other people like him, they've got money, they appear to have money, they appear to have women, they appear to have power, they appear to have success. So they are gravitating towards the things that they feel that they desire and they don't have. And in particular, it's boys who come from very underprivileged backgrounds, and they grow up from as young as 8, seeing that money is a thing their family doesn't have, and it stops them from being able to do the things they want to do. So if a man comes along and goes, hey, I'm a millionaire, I'm strong, women love me, this is how you need to live, and I'm going to give you rules to live your life, then they're going to go towards that because they just want to make sense of the world. Whereas the problem is to be, quote unquote, kind of a good man and have healthy masculinity, the rules are less clear, right? Than the rules are often kind of prescribed by, say, very traditional versions of masculinity, or what we kind of see now is very kind of, what I like to call like immature versions of masculinity, which are, you know, dominate women, dominating instead of being kind of collaborative.
I mean, masculinity is always, it's seen as a pejorative in terms, but feminism, and rightfully so, women have made, you know, wondrous movement over the past 30, 40 years. Are men being left behind?
Yes. We've never had a movement to move men, like a coherent movement, right? To move men out of what we could say like 1950s masculinity. We've never had any movement that come together and it's like, yes, like men coming together and being like, yes, we want to change, we want more, we want a different life and experience. There's been little movements here and there, and there's, you know, I work a lot in the kind of men's workspace, but if you compare that to feminism, which completely transformed women's view of themselves and what they're kind of allowed to do, you know, men, we still have this very common thread of like, you know, you should be a good provider, a good protector, you should be strong, you should be capable, blah, 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 you should have a job. But if a man strays from that path and he becomes a stay-at-home dad, or he becomes a ballerina or something like that, it's still very openly ridiculed, whether it's in newspapers, whether it's on TV shows and all sorts. Whereas we've really started to shift and change how we view women and their capacity and capability. So I would say that as men, I think we're entering into a phase of evolution, but I think it happens very slowly, because ultimately the whole structure of capitalism doesn't lead men to the kind of self-exploration they really need, because they need to be able to create capital. You know, you don't have the space to like go off for a week retreat and like really get deep into your emotions, because you might get a bit messy, you might become a bit emotional, and you go into work and you have to make hard decisions, and you may be like, wait, this decision I have to make, this is cruel. Like, this is going to hurt all these people in my company. I don't want to do this. But what do we need? Men who are hardened and don't care about, really can be quite cold. So I think that's the system kind of keeps men in this hamster wheel because we're so busy working, providing, and being in this role that we've been put to us.
So it's not so much the issue of toxic masculinity, but toxic conditioning, because that toxicity or that conditioning is baked into our almost capitalist society.
Yeah.
So this is cause and effect, right? So that's one of the topics, conditionings, and that's I suppose would be one of the first steps to kind of unpack in our own conditioning. We're all conditioned on some level on that spectrum, depending upon our experiences and our background, our culture, society that we were raised in, etc. But you've also mentioned something about the avoidant man as well. Can you just explain to us what that is, what that means?
Yeah, so there's attachment styles. There's 4 attachment styles. Secure is like you're secure with love. You're fine with independence. You're fine with closeness. You feel comfortable with communication and being open and so forth. And then you have kind of what we call anxious, which is often people who are, it says in the word, they're very anxious about love. So they often are more likely to lean into and attach quite quickly. You know, some of the things they desire to experience themselves as lovable. You know, so often their underlying kind of belief or fear is they're not lovable, they can't find love, and they're trying to prove that wrong. Then you have those who are avoidant, and those people have a similar fear as the anxious people. They're not sure if they're good enough or lovable, but instead of trying to prove it wrong, they're like, well, I believe this to be true, I'm just going to move away. But they still have an innate desire for connection, right? So they want to move towards it. And then you have disorganized people, and they are kind of a mix of the anxious and avoidant, which can be really difficult for them in society, and it's linked to various conditions like ADHD sometimes and so forth. And if the parents were very inconsistent in their parenting. And the thing is, often we think of men as being avoidant and women as anxious, right? And there's no real scientific proof and study to say that that's actually how it is. It's just that with the male conditioning on top of an anxious man, for instance, right, he will appear to be avoidant and disinterested because that's his conditioning, that male conditioning weighs quite heavy on him as well. And also the way that we look at dating and relationships as a man being the pursuer and the woman being the pursued. And we often also, strangely, we think it's unmanly to be kind of too eager, right? He's desperate, things like that. And that's where kind of anxious people often fall into when it comes to kind of dating relationships. They're often the more eager person in the relationship for touch, for closeness, for time together, which can lead to things like codependency and falling for people who can never meet their needs and stuff like that.
So that was my next question, as to what level of suffering do these various different profiles lead to for the individual?
Yeah. So when you've got anxious and avoidant couples, for instance, like I'm avoidant, that's where I've leaned, I always have done. And I must do much less now. My partner's anxious, and you can see how our wounds fit together perfectly to create a really not as harmful sometimes dynamic, right? So in my case, with my partner Orsa, she wants closeness, I want distance. So what happens? She moves towards me and I move away. Creates pain for her. The pain for her is like, he doesn't want me. The pain for me is like, oh my God, she's trying to suffocate me and she's trying to get too close to me, and like, you know, she's trying to be with me all the time. So it creates pain for both of us. And there's like multiple places where this kind of happens in a relationship. It can happen within intimacy. It can happen within our communication and so forth. And there's a lot of people that are in this dynamic of relationship, and they just like, this is how it is and it can't change, but it can. You know, we can learn to like expand the human being. Neuroplasticity is always at work for us. So it can create a lot of suffering. And when we look at the kind of dating world, like this is the kind of really standard way that we look at men and women. Men are avoidant. They move away from love. They're scared of commitment, you know, all these sorts of things. And women want commitment, want love and so forth. But there's one added layer I didn't mention, is that women receive the conditioning that relationships are really important. Right? You see it from young girls when they're at school. They're all about relationships and connection and communication. So they're conditioned, and they see movies with women who are chasing love and wanting Mr. Right and so forth. Their conditioning is that relationships are really important. But as men, we get conditioned into money and career, and those sorts of things are important. So it's like these multiple layers of conditioning that cause us, when we're in these kind of relationships, situations, to kind of play out certain scripts. And we often think that this is who we are. Right? I'm just like this. This is who I am. Like, don't try and change me. But it's like, is it really who you are? Or is it just what you've learned to be? because that was what you were shown. That's what people told you. That's what the examples you had. I was definitely that way. My father is avoidant. My father is incredibly avoidant. And what I observed around my life as a young man was how men were being. I experienced a heartbreak at 18, which meant I was like, oh, I need to protect my heart. And it's only when I started to look and go, is this who I really am? Or just what I do to keep myself safe? That's a lot of what we're doing. We're trying to keep ourselves safe. So even when we're in a relationship and our partner wants to talk about a subject, right, a deep and meaningful subject, and we move away from that, is we want to protect ourselves from what we perceive will be pain and hurt in some way. We might be very misguided in it. She wants to talk about our sex life. This is a good example. Wants about sex life. And we're like, I don't want to talk about sex life. Why do we talk about sex life? We don't need to talk about sex. And really what's
sex is
behind
good. We don't need to talk about it. Yeah, it's fine. That's a typical bloke response.
Yeah.
Whoa, why do we talk about this?
What's behind it is I'm fearful that I'm going to be blamed. I'm going to be shamed. I've been doing something wrong, right? Then I'm going to feel guilt and shame about that. So we move away from that experience because, it's better to stay safe than face these feelings. Okay.
Can I ask, what impact do you think porn is having on the next generation of men?
It is really warping their view of what sex and intimacy are, because when we were kids, all we had was magazines, right? So, and magazines move very slowly, and if you're lucky, you get passed down from your brother or an older sibling, or you go to a dodgy newsagent and he'll sell them to you. So it's just like, it was a very much of a novelty, right? And it didn't really have sex acts. It was women naked, right?
The sticky pages and magazines that you get, and you're like, oh.
Did you have my magazine?
And so why would, sometimes you'd find random porn pages in the park.
Yes.
I remember
And
my
forests.
first experience at a park. That was the first time I saw breasts.
Oh my goodness.
What was your first experience with porn?
I think I was away on a school trip, and I think we were on the bus, and someone, normally, there's always the naughty boy of the class,
got the laptop out,
but who had an older brother, and he managed to find his porn stash,
Yep.
and he brought this sticky page magazine onto the bus, and we'd get to the back and have a look through it. You take this page home, I'll take that page.
Yeah.
We'll meet in the middle.
But we just had pages, right? Now there is a huge library of porn that's just accessed through your phones, right? Any time you want to go there. And what we're seeing is that's where kids are learning about sex. And the problem is when the more we watch porn, not for everybody, but predominant of people, men and women as well, boys and girls, the more we watch porn, the more we are tuning our desire and our kind of turn on to what we like. And we become more and more extreme, because what we looked at today and we've looked at for a month becomes very vanilla. So we then we might start with, just a man and a woman, and we're like, oh, this really does it for me. And then we notice that, oh, there's this guy and he's got a whip and he's hitting this woman. Okay, that seems quite cool. And that's a bit of BDSM. But then we start going deeper into the kind of spiraling to like violence and pain. And we don't know about things. We're watching it, we're consuming it. We're not thinking like, oh, this is consent. And we're not thinking about boundaries, and we're talking about safe words and all these things. So we just see the act.
The physical act.
Yeah. So then we kind of download that into our minds, and then we go and try it out. So what we're seeing is this huge, especially in kind of young adults, is a lot of choking happening amongst young adults, boys, girls, and so forth, choking because they've seen it in porn. They're like, well, this is what you do. This is what women like, right? Because in the porn, and also in porn, whatever the man does in porn, the woman loves it. She never turns around and goes, hey, no, I'm not really into that. Can we do something else? There's never that conversation. So we just see this like ever-present, like continual assumed assent and consent and no rejection. So then we take that and we start acting those things out. We act them out without consent. And women do these things with boys because they think that's what I should like. That's what I should be doing. And you actually start to see kind of spirals of people doing a lot of things they don't really like just because they think that's what they should do. And they're getting deeper and deeper into it and actually creating a lot of like pain and trauma for each other.
How much pressure do you think porn's putting on young girls?
Huge amounts. It's, it's the same body image stuff that we're seeing that we've always seen. Like, now, if you just think when you watch an advert on TV now, we see a range of body sizes and types, right? And I've got an older sister who's 10 years older than me. We often laugh and go, wow, like when we were kids, you never saw that. There was like a singular type of body you saw everywhere. Like at least now we've got that in TV. in porn, it's generally what, big tits, big ass, shaven pussies. Like, it's a very particular look. Even now, I've seen some porn where it's almost like girls are dressing up like pixies and fairies, like what you would see in kind of gaming characters and so forth. You know,
like the anime stuff.
Yeah.
Which I've heard of. Like, somebody told me about it.
But it's impacting how we view sex and sex acts and what we should be doing. Like, thankfully, there is a lot of consent conversation. The schools are doing a lot of talks about consent and sex, and that there's an improved sex education in comparison to like my generation. But there's also the fighting the tide of kind of porn, because that is also really strong for young people.
I'd be so curious to see like what sex education is like in school. We had, was it PSHE that we used to have it in?
Yeah.
And I can't remember a single conversation from it. And like, I wonder how schools are navigating this tornado of pornography.
Badly.
Like, yeah.
Because there's a lot of fear around parents. Like, you know, there's a lot, I know some sex educators that do sex education, and the problem is that parents get wind that there's going to be this sex education, because they feel shameful, they feel scared, they feel uncomfortable, they pull their kids out. Or they hear that, oh, there's going to be porn going to be showed to them, or they're going to be taught about rimming and all these other things, when really the sex education is about consent, right? About what certain types of touch is appropriate and not appropriate. Like, they're trying to do some sex education for younger kids, and a lot of it really is centered around what's appropriate and inappropriate touch to have with someone your own age and someone older. And like, that's such an important thing to teach very young kids, right? To stop abuse, and also to teach them the real names for their privates. But parents feel so uncomfortable, they hear lots of scaremongering, so they want to pull their kids away from it because of their own kind of uncomfortability.
For consenting adults, is there a healthy dose of porn that helps to nurture desire? And how does that look? And there's a sinister downward spiral to porn, but is there an upside as well?
Yeah. I once was on, I think it was an online panel talk during COVID, and there was a guy on there, and I can't remember where he was from. He was in the UK. He was from somewhere in the UK, but like, it would have been like the middle of kind of nowhere, right? And he said he felt that porn has saved his life, because he started to watch porn and he realized, I'm not the only weirdo who likes leather. And I used to feel really alone, because I used to really I see like leather boots and get turned on. I thought I was really weird and there was something wrong with me. Until I went online, I started to watch porn, and I found a community of people. Or there's a lot of porn out there, for instance, that can be educational, right? For us to actually learn. There is a small place for educational porn, and also for couples, for instance. You know, it can be a wonderful practice between two couples, and it could be nerve-wracking for couples. I know a lot of couples who feel uncomfortable with this. Actually watching porn together. And learning about like, oh, what sort of porn do you watch? Like, what are you into? Oh, you like that? Oh, would you like to try that? That can be a way to kind of connect and also feel desire in our own bodies together. You know, it can be used as a way to.
Okay, how do we start that conversation then? You're with your partner, and you're intrigued, you want to start watching porn together. How does that conversation pan out?
Yeah, I think it has to start with kind of asking them, do you ever watch porn? Like, you know, as a man, you say to your partner, did you ever watch porn? She might go, yeah. I never forget the first time me and my partner did. When we first met, just some context, when we first met, me and my partner also, we did a podcast episode on my podcast, and we were talking about sexual liberation. And when we would talk about watching porn together, and I could see she was visibly nervous about it. So I would be like, what sort of porn do you watch? And she, like, you know, tentatively, she was nervous, and I could see she was nervous. So she'd be like, oh, you know, I kind of watch girl on girl. I'm not really into when there's like a man involved, because it gets really aggressive. And I'd be like, okay, yeah, I get that. I can see where that doesn't. I'm not really into aggressive porn myself. So we started lightly, like, you know, stuff where it was almost like breast massage, you know, just something that was light for us to kind of get into. I think another way to start as well, to have that conversation, is even what's it called, like erotica, like verbal. Like, you know, you've got lots of like Audible books. I don't know how much Audible has.
She put Audible on in the car. Daughter's trying to sleep in the back. He touched her breasts.
But like, that can be another way without the kind of images. But it's like actually talking about sex.
Yeah.
Like, oh, do you ever watch porn? Because as men, often we feel there's a lot of shame about us watching porn. Porn is bad. We shouldn't watch porn. There's something wrong with us as adults and watch porn, which I don't think there is. So it's just, can we open up a conversation between us about a thing that we might be watching or they might have watched in the past? Sometimes just like a joke or a podcast can be a really good, like I find podcasts are a great way to introduce concepts and ideas into your relationship. If you're not sure how to do it, put on a podcast in the car about something, like this podcast episode here, and be like, oh, how do you feel about that? What's your thoughts and feelings of that? Oh, you wouldn't watch porn. Is there somewhere you would be willing to go? Like instead of going all the way to the thing, is there like a light end that you like entertain? Like, I don't know, a porn magazine, for instance.
Yeah, you got a few of those.
Yeah. Do you know what the most awkward thing for me, when I was on my 16th birthday, we were away on holiday with other families. My brother gave me an illustrated book of the Kama Sutra, and in front of all the other families who were kind of appalled, and there's all this kind of shame around it, and but should we talk about wanking?
Let's talk about wanking.
Should we talk about wanking, David? Because that term is a derogatory term. It's the sort of thing, right? So everybody
dirty.
Let's be honest, right? Everybody wanks.
Everybody
right?
wanks.
And it used to be a really derogatory term to call someone a wanker and all this kind of stuff.
I've just got a little giggle in me already. It's just ingrained, isn't it?
But there seems to have been
giggles.
There seems to have been this interesting journey now where this self-love movement and self-intimacy seems to have transcended a lot of that old language and denial about wanking, and it's shifted into more about self-pleasure. How has that evolution played out?
Yeah. I think you have to thank feminism actually for, first of all, like bringing de-shaming pleasure for women, right? So if you go into your average sex toy shop, it's 90% women stuff in there, pretty much.
I don't know, but yes.
What's a sex shop?
So we're seeing now where as men we would go off and have a wank in private, in shame, and do that, and start to having conversations about masturbation and wanking and the health benefits of masturbation and orgasms and so forth. And
what are the health benefits of wanking?
So orgasms are great. Like there's various drugs and hormones that are released that like almost can combat depression. Yeah, it's like a really like ways in which we can boost. Is it serotonin? Yes, so forth. I can't remember. That's like a seesaw of what goes up and down. But like, yeah, masturbation is really good for us.
A wank a day keeps the doctor away.
Yeah, but I also think that it's the way in which we enter into it. What's our mindset? Is there like, oh my God, I'm guilty, I'm shameful, I'm dirty? Then that's a whole different thing. Yeah. But if it is from a case of like, oh, I want to connect with myself. Like when I have my clients, I ask them to stop watching porn when they masturbate and just get used to feeling their own sensations in their body. Because often as men, we don't actually feel much in our bodies. We don't feel, if I feel sadness, where do I feel sadness? Like I know that I often feel sadness in my stomach and my solar plexus. If I feel fear, it's like a tightness in my chest. But we're not used to really being in touch with our bodies. So we don't touch ourselves. So bringing kind of self-touch and self-massage into our self-pleasure, let's not just focus on our penis and not just focus on our willies, right? And actually bringing all of our bodies into it. And I like to add another layer I find really helps with men. It's actually when you remove the goal of coming, it means that the only goal is to explore and feel. Because once we have a goal and the goal is coming, we just try and get there as fast as possible. And I find that when we remove that, or we say we're choosing not to do that, that we develop more of a kind of self-intimate relationship with our bodies and our sensations and feelings. Really
like that. Have you heard the term post-nut clarity?
Yes.
What's your views on that? Like, when you've had a wank, it's all out there. There's this just kind of sense of everything seems a bit clearer now. Everything's okay. And beforehand, you can be a little bit agitated, a little bit like
stress relief.
And it's
like,
a huge stress relief.
Okay.
Wanking's a huge stress relief. But a lot of people wank and have sex as a way to release like pent up tension. Then we release all the tension and we're like, oh God, it's all out. Or we're feeling agitated and it's a way of releasing.
I suppose particularly with high levels of testosterone, that energy can build and it can manifest in different ways. I suppose, self-pleasure, masturbation can become a way of managing that internal energy that you feel.
Yeah. The only problem is if it's the only way you manage it. Right? That's often what happens when you get porn addiction. It's like porn addiction isn't just about masturbation, but it's when it's the only way that you manage. It's like anything, you need to have multiple ways to release stress. Like if you only use one, you basically often turns into addiction. Our phones are an addiction. Porn or masturbation is It's having multiple avenues to release stress, and masturbation and sex can be one of them.
So what steps should a man go on if they are currently in a place where they're using porn and masturbation as a means to an end, i.e. ejaculation, but they want to move themselves towards not using porn, being in touch with themselves and connecting with themselves? How does that journey, what are the phases look like?
First thing is to slow down. Slow it down. Instead of it being this 5-minute thing you do very quickly in the bathroom or whatever, it's like take 10, 15, 20 minutes.
What are you taking so long for upstairs?
Take a bit of longer time. Like maybe you know, if everyone's out the house, that's even better, you know.
Would you tell your partner that you're off to self-pleasure? How would that?
Yeah, I have. I found it, then it removes...
Wow, that's a concept I'd find hard.
It removes the concern of like
literally
her walking in.
Like, I'm just going upstairs for a wank.
Yeah.
Ooh, how would you find with that?
Would you
be able to do that?
No, I think that maybe particularly with, this is Dad's podcast, in the weeks, months after your child, very often I think that men feel shame around that because their testosterone, their sexual urge, their desire is still growing, but it's not appropriate for them to have intercourse with the wife for various different reasons. And if there could be an open dialogue and say, I'm feeling this energy, I'm going to go in self-pleasure to release that. It's no reflection on you. I would, I still have my love for you, but this is something I'm doing for myself. Then surely that would be a healthier way to be.
Yeah.
That's so well put.
And there's one of the things that we often have in relationship is if I'm wanking, then it means that my female partner, like there's some way in which I shouldn't be doing that because I have her, where we pit sex, my masturbation and self-pleasure against, sex with her so that she doesn't like, or vice versa. Like if my partner says to me, I'm going to self-pleasure, I'm like, lock yourself out, I'm going to watch football.
Yeah.
It's all good because I feel no competition. But sometimes we get into this realm of kind of, if they're doing that, what's wrong with me?
You've got me for that.
Yes.
Yeah, that kind.
And that's exactly that we need to really kind of
change
unpack and just be like, oh, wait, like it's a different sort of experience. It's a self-exploration experience and it's not in competition with sex.
Okay. David, I could speak about this all day. I love this. Just before we're going to have to wrap up, but what is your best piece of advice for somebody who wants to become more intimate with their partner?
Talking. One of the start to talk about like what does intimacy mean to you? What does it give you? How do you feel when we're intimate? To get an understanding of what it means to them and what they get out of it. Some of us do it for connection, some of us do it for stress relief. And it's a conversation where there's no shame for what someone brings up, to understand what someone gets out of it, what they enjoy, what they like. Like, simply being like, what do you like? And it might be simple things like, I love it when you run your fingers over my knee or you run your hands through my hair. It doesn't have to be kind of the big sexual acts. Like, I love it when you paddle me across the back of the chair or whatever it may be.
What does that mean?
Paddle.
I paddle.
You get a smack across the arse.
Oh, okay.
But actually, there's really small things because suddenly then we know what our partners likes and we ask about how they like sex to be initiated, intimacy to be initiated. And then we have them in our minds. And like, as men, I think that we want to please our partners, right? So if we know that like, she really likes when I just kind of like run my fingers through her hair, you just might do it once a day because it's a small thing. She really enjoys it, right? But we don't talk enough about the things that, because we're scared of what the answer is going to be.
So good. So I'll be taking a lot of tips away from this episode.
A lot of paddles.
Yeah. I'm not sure about the paddling bit. David Chambers, thank you so much for coming on. For any listeners who want to find out more about your work, where can they look online?
Yeah, probably the best place to find me is Instagram at authenticman_. And then the second place after that is probably my podcast where I've got almost 300 episodes recorded now.
Amazing. And I know you're very kind of new to fatherhood still, but we always do like to ask, what is your top secret to parenting?
Oh man, I think I've been really lucky with our little boy, I think I've been really lucky. I would say as a man is carving out some one-on-one time with them that you can have. If you can do it daily, even better, but like one-to-one time with your child, because I've noticed that there's a different dynamic when my partner's in the room or she's there, like carving out that one-to-one time. My little boy, I take him from kind of 7 a.m. through to 10. And that's worked really nicely, like, because we always have that time together almost every day.
Nice. Really like that. David, thank you so much. I love that.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
The Secret Life of Dad.
Daddy made a podcast.